Fine. Okay, the very first thing, yes, again, if I could just repeat, please mute yourselves. And indeed, if you don't want to be distracted by all the little tiles, as it were, of other people, I would urge you to put it on speaker view when we start properly, but you probably know that already. But the mute, if you wouldn't mind, is quite important to avoid any background kind of interference and disturbance. There will be a chance to ask questions later on through the chat function. I'm sure by now you all know exactly how that works because of the large numbers we're expecting, and indeed who have already appeared tonight. If you could just type in your comments in the first instance and questions, and I will kind of relay them and perhaps ask you to unmute yourselves if it seems appropriate to do so. Anyway, first of all, myself, Monica Bohm-Duchin, if I can just, for those of you who haven't come across me before, I am the initiator and the later the director of the Insiders Outsiders Festival, which is a small idea I had some 3 years ago, which got very big rather quickly. And essentially it was a nationwide year-long arts festival based in this country, in the UK, to pay tribute to the myriad and rich contributions of those from Nazi Europe, what they did for British culture. Please mute yourselves, everybody, please. And one of the great pleasures of working on that ambitious project was getting to know Pamela, indeed working with her. Now, I won't say anything more about myself. I'm going to hand over to Pamela very shortly. I hope that everybody will have had a chance to watch the taster film. It's not even really an excerpt from the film in progress, although I did describe it as such. But what you have seen on YouTube just now is an edited version of the recording that Andrew Snell, who I believe is in the audience with us today, made of a tribute event at the Linbury Theatre in Covent Garden shortly after Ralph's death in 2018. And it was designed really to give you a taste, both visually and from the kind of input of wide range of different people who encountered him in one way or another, the kind of richness of his own production and the kind of, well, the one-off character that Ralph was. I did have the pleasure of meeting him. I spent a few days in the Loire Valley, just actually not that long before he died. He was an extraordinary man, but I'm sure you already know that, and you will indeed have had a taste of that. Pam will briefly introduce our other participants today, but let me just say a few brief words about Pamela Howard, for those of you who don't know her. She's a stage director and what she calls a scenographer, not a stage designer in the conventional sense. A scenographer working primarily in opera and contemporary music theatre. And in her own words, her practice encompasses both large and small scale productions from major opera houses all over the world, and at the other end of the spectrum, what she calls unloved and forgotten spaces. And I first met her when she, please make sure you're muted. I first met her when she was working. I'm sorry, can you please mute yourself? Okay. When she was working on a wonderful project, which some of you, well, you will know the artist in question. The project she started in 2013, it's called Charlotta, a tri-coloured play with music, and it's based on the extraordinary and poignant but wonderfully creative life of Charlotta Salomon, who had a show not so long ago here in London, whose work has been seen all over the world. I won't go into details there, but it's a magnificent play. It's been seen, I will say this, Pamela, I'm sure you won't mind, it's been seen all over the world, but not in this country, which is absolutely shameful. Anyway, and then more recently still, I had the very great pleasure of being a kind of accomplice, as it were, on a new project that was actually sparked, as it were, was sort of prompted by the Insiders Outsiders Festival, called the Ballad of the Cosmo Cafe. And for those of you who didn't see it, it is an absolutely wonderful kind of bittersweet evocation of the Cosmo Cafe in the Finchley Strasse, which was frequented by so many of the emigres. And there is a film version. There's a film version of that. Sorry, somebody, Charles, is that you? Perhaps you should mute.
First time I've used this computer on Zoom, so I think I might get the other one up.
I think, okay, I can only do so much. Where was I? Yes, the Ballad of the Cosmo Cafe, it's actually available. There's a film version of it on the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel, which you can find simply by doing a Google search for that. So I would urge you to enjoy that after this at some point. Very good. What else? She's the author of a really standard book, I think it's true to say, called What is Cenography, published now in 7 languages. Well, I think that's pretty impressive, and it's just come out in its 3rd edition in 2019. And last but not least, in 2008, she was awarded the OBE for services to drama. Well, I think that's enough by way of preamble. Pamela, over to you. And I would say to everybody, put it on speaker view now if you haven't already, so you only see who's talking.
What is speaker view? I'm not.
It's up at the top right for those of you who don't know. and you should then just see the person who's speaking. Okay.
Is it a thing with a little arrow?
You don't have to worry, Pamela. You just talk. It's really for the benefit of the others.
Okay.
And I'm going to let in all the other people now, patiently waiting.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Can I start?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, after all this, welcome everybody. And I want to say particularly to Jane Koltai, who is in Foncluse on top of a hillside in France, and I know is watching this. So hi, Jane, here we are. We're going for it, as you know, and thank you for all your help. And to all my friends and colleagues, I'm amazed just to hear who I've heard already, but welcome, welcome, welcome to this little talk about our friend Ralph as the artist. Maybe some surprising things. I want to say that Ralph's personality touched so many people. And just last week, we heard sadly of the death of the great titan.
I'm sorry, Charles, I think it's probably you. You need really to mute yourself or just to keep silent. I don't want to sound cool.
I'm not saying anything.
Is someone named John?
Is it somebody called John who's talking? Well, hold on.
It's Troy, is it? From Canada.
There's somebody who's talking.
Pamela's John who needs to mute themselves, or you can actually mute them.
Yes, I'm going to try. I'm just trying to find him. There we are. Yes, there we are. Okay, that should be better now. Very good. Sorry, Pamela. Do continue.
Okay. So what I was just going to say is that just last week we heard sadly of the death of the great titan of American theatre design, Ming-Cho Lee. He was 90, and what with him and the late Joseph Swoboda from Prague and Ralph, we once staged an event at the Prague State Opera, and that event was called, I called it, because I love a title, incidentally, and I called it The Three Great Horsemen of the Cenographic Apocalypse. Can you imagine? And they sat on the stage of the State Opera, and each one of them I had made a script for them. Each one of them ignored the script completely and said their own thing. But these three great horsemen are now in a golden chariot in the sky. And I just want to give that image of Ralph being the last one to join the three great horsemen of the Cenographic Apocalypse. I'm very glad to welcome, as you said, well, we've lost Di Trevis somewhere, and I hope we haven't lost Simon Callow. And we've got Charles Woolff, and I'm going to hope that Charles will speak first. But I want to pay tribute to Charles in a way that some people may not know, because Ralph and Charles worked together for a huge part of Ralph's life, I think always. And Charles was able to translate Ralph's ideas into the investigation of new technology and new materials. And that became a signature of Ralph's work. And anyone who is old enough, well, I am, to remember As You Like It and the beginning of the Forest of Arden, which was simply perspex tubes but lit. Charles will talk about that, will know that that was a journey that both Charles and Ralph went on throughout Ralph's life. And I know that there's a tremendous good relationship. So thank you very much for coming. I'm sorry that we've lost Di Trevis somewhere, but I will just say in her absence that Di trained initially as an anthropologist and became a theatre director and an actress. But it was her skills as an anthropologist that got Ralph to talk about his early life when we did the first retrospective that Sarah Kesselman referred to in the film that you will have just seen. And for the very first time, we made biography boards like you have in art exhibitions. And there was the photo of the little boy getting off the train. And also he talked about his schooling and his parents for the very first time. And I was hoping that Di would say a little bit more about how she did that miraculous thing. But anyway, thank you for coming or not coming, Di, whatever the situation is. And I'm extremely glad to welcome Simon Callow. He's gone from my screen, but
no, don't worry, I'm sure he's there, Pamela.
Yeah, I'm sure he's there with his red glasses. And Simon and I have coincided in many different ways, and especially at the exhibitions the art exhibitions that I have curated. And Simon has always had a very interesting view, but he has also interviewed Ralph about the Nuremberg Trials. And although this is an event talking about Ralph the artist, I know that Simon will have some interesting views about Ralph and the Nuremberg Trials. And we have just seen on Andrew's film the little swipe cards that allowed him to go into the actual trials himself. So thank you to all of those people and to all the people who've turned up from here. Glad to see you, Troy. I'm frightened of Troy, but lovely to see you. No, I love you dearly. I'm just frightened of you because you're my boss at the moment. Well, so I think without, oh yes, and I just want to say a big, big, big thank you to Andrew Snell and Eileen Hughes, who managed to make that small excerpt of the documentary that is in progress. Okay, so having said all that, can I ask Charles, can you speak for, I think we said 5 minutes, about new technology as it was then, as it is now, and your brilliance with an acrylic screen. There's your cue. Thank you.
Sorry, it's a good time to cough, isn't it? Thank you very much. First of all, let me just tell you that in the left-hand corner, you'll see that it says Mara Woolff. And as hard as we can't change it to Charles. My name is Charles Woolff, and I've been in plastics now for probably over 65 years. My initial start was with a company making door handles in Perspex. And after a period of time, I got a little bit bored with that and met a man who said that he could make virtually anything. So that was where I started in 1969. And that is almost the beginning of the use of plastics in the theatre world, in virtually anywhere. Just quickly, Perspex was invented in 1934. And Germany and England claimed that they invented it together at the same time. And of course, during the war, the benefit of Perspex was that it gave us the fastest aircraft that there was. The Spitfire with a streamlined canopy was able to fly anything else. After the war, ICI didn't know what to do with Perspex. And my late father, who was also involved in plastics, remembers the things that they used to make. And it's not even worth mentioning because they were just very simple and very decorative items. When I met Ralph in 1960, and I'm going to go back to my notes now, if I may, because it's probably safer and quick and easier. When I began my work at Talbot Designs in 1968, Ralph Koltai had already commissioned the company to make the now very famous all-plastic set for the National Theatre production of As You Like It in 1967. That very early use of plastics on stage consisted simply of flat fabrications, and the main object was that it lasted as long as the production. As probably all of you know, Perspex on the whole is quite fragile, and on stage it's easily broken. Sorry, I'm just going to get rid of that call. Anyway, so Perspex is very fragile. But Ralph used it in this production of As You Like It. And as you heard, it consisted of tubes of acrylic, which represented trees, and various flat panels, which represented the tree trunks. The production was outstanding, and at the time, nothing else on stage had appeared before it or after it. A tragic incident in the summer of 1973 changed everything for designers and suppliers of plastics to public places. A fire occurred in the Summerland Fairground on the Isle of Man, and 50 people died from burns and from suffocation. It was the most tragic event, and they couldn't get out of the building quickly enough. The material that was used on that occasion was plexiglass. And plexiglass is the trade name for Perspex in America. And that material was the material that was used at the time, because they had undercut Perspex, and in some ways, Perspex avoided the situation. The immediate effect was the introduction of strict requirements for all plastics to be used in theatre, to be self-extinguishing. And I'm sure that you've all heard of grade 1 fire retardant plastics. The idea is that you put a match to it and you take the match away, it goes out. There are lots of other side effects to it, but generally that is what is accepted. And polycarbonate, new to the market in the 70s, was the answer. But polycarbonate was primarily for flat applications, such as unbreakable windows, and there had been very little use on, or very little experiments on it in that time. Ralph would often call me and ask me with his unmistakable voice and accent, "Can you make me this?" On this occasion, sitting in my office, Ralph took a piece of A4 paper and said, "I want that in clear plastic, 10 meters high, 30 feet. And we put our heads together, because that's what Ralph and I always managed to do, is put our heads together. And it became a set for Too True to Be Good.
Oh, gosh.
That's Ian McKellen.
Oh, yes.
Standing in front of that major piece. And that was the result of that paper design.
Wow.
With Tippett's Icebreak in 1977, Ralph started to design sets using large plastic panels. The problem of expansion and contraction became a serious one after securing it to the stage flats and creating unacceptable distortions due to shrinkage. And by the time the Royal Shakespeare Company Much Ado About Nothing had arrived in 1982, we were hanging all the sheets like drapes, and they were allowed to be free at the sides, so which turned what looked like images at a fun fair into the image that we finally created. While Ralph was in our factory at that time, he saw a piece of bronze acrylic, and he said, "I want that." I said, you can't have it. It's not fire retardant. He said, but I want it for the floor. He said, that would make the floor perfect. I agree, because I knew between us we would be able to find an answer. We produced the floor from 6mm clear polycarbonate with bronze tinted polyester mirror film applied to the underside of the panel. This material is what they use on windows to cut out the sun glare. Ralph also arranged for two shallow trays to be set up either side of the stage. Before every actor's entrance, they would step onto the tray to remove the grit from their shoes. This helped preserve the floor for the long production that was going on. The finish was stunning. I mean, I don't know if anybody can see, but Much Ado is an incredible set, and it's probably my favorite of all the things that I've been involved in over the years. This production was also chosen to represent this country in the Arts Festival in the Olympics in Los Angeles in 1984, which was very remarkable. Over the years, I spent a lot of time with Ralph. And in 1982, a couple of months before the opening of Much Ado, we went out for a meal together in St. John's Wood. And as my wife Mara and I were getting up to leave, Ralph said, "Have a good Pesach." Now, I'd known him 14 years, and he knew I was Jewish, and he had never mentioned this before. And it was only in later years that I began to realize how he had cut this out of his life because of what he had to go through. Looking back now, more than 50 years of working with Ralph, it was always exciting, it was always challenging, and Ralph always knew exactly what he wanted. I have been fortunate to work with quite a lot of designers over the years, but Ralph always knew what it was and how it could be achieved. And it worked well, and it was a great partnership. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a wonderful beginning to that. And certainly Ralph kept extremely quiet for a long, long time. I'm sorry that we haven't got Di Trebers here, but I'm going to ask Simon. Have we got Simon still? Simon?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Simon, I wonder if you can follow Charles's brilliant by being even more brilliant, maybe.
It's going to be a challenge. You know, my relationship to Ralph was rather tangential in a way. We never quite worked together. I mean, we very nearly did. He was going to design a production of a new musical version of The Great Gatsby, which I was going to direct. Richard Rodney Bennett was going to write the music, and it was a fantastically distinguished crew and a cast and creative team that we assembled. But due to the vagaries of the producer, alas, it never happened. I was absolutely thrilled when they asked Ralph to do it. They didn't consult me, they just asked Ralph. But I not only was I very aware of his legend within the theatre, and he was legendary. I mean, he was an extraordinary, magnificent, flamboyant figure of a kind that I regret the absence of these days, with his famous awful old stogie. He had one of these terrible old Gasper cigars that he used to smoke all the time. His wonderfully, I think probably slightly worked on, fabulous Berlin accent, and his wit. This is a rather silly story, but I want to tell it because it shows how wonderfully funny and quick he was. It concerns a production of Love's Labour's Lost that he did for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and in those days, young and very brilliant Ruby Wax was playing Jaquanetta, and she stood in front of the mirror at her first costume fitting, plucking at it, the way actors sometimes do in a rather unhappy way. And Ralph said to her, "Something wrong, Ruby?" And she said, well, yes, Ralph, she said, it just doesn't look the way it did in the picture. And he said, well, you see, Ruby, unfortunately, sometimes we can't always afford the best materials. Just like sometimes we can't afford the best actresses. This story delighted Ruby. It went around the theatre very quickly. The point, the more serious point about this is that, of course, I found him enchanting, and we did meet often over the years. And I wrote an introduction to a book of his sculptures and so on. I mean, I just adored the man utterly at every level. But what was fantastic about him was I thought there was a sort of roguishness about him, which was a sort of triumph of survival. And this became clear when we saw the Nuremberg footage and I interviewed him. And Ralph was not at all sentimental. There was nothing sentimental about the man at all. And he wasn't even, I think, especially emotional, but he was just a great survivor. And he triumphed and gloried in his survival. And that is such an essential aspect of his personality, but it extended to the work as well, because he did something unbelievably brave as a designer. That is to say, he familiarized himself with the text, and then he opened himself to inspiration. He didn't, as far as I'm aware, sit down and work anything out at all. He waited in a sort of Zen-like way for the revelation of what the play required. And his concept of what plays required was unlike that of anybody else that I know, because he always transcended or went beyond, in fact, dismissed the concept of realism in the theatre at all, meant very little to him at all. What he wanted to create was an environment which became profoundly expressive, with which the actors interacted rather than merely inhabited. And we saw it time and time again in those wonderful designs for the representative, indeed for As You Like It, and so on. And it was told of him because I worked with people who'd been his assistants, like John Napier and Robin Donn, and they both told me the same thing, that Ralph would quite literally go to a design meeting without an idea in his head, but open himself to suggestion, and he would arrive having seen, shall we say, a large dustbin on the way to the rehearsal room, and he'd say, this will be the design. And he would say, and there was the large dustbin. And people, he told me once, he was very proud of this. He said, nobody ever refused a design of mine. Whenever, because he just got it right. He discovered the thing that would somehow liberate the play and make it profoundly expressive. I don't know of any other designer who worked quite like this. In the introduction to my book about his sculptures, I said that what was extraordinary about Ralph was that his sculptures were theatrical and his theatre was sculptural. And it has created images in my mind that can never be expunged from it. So it's absolutely thrilling to hear Charles talk about the means by which these improbable inspirations were achieved. I think it places him in the ranks of the great artists, Ralph, not just an artist in the theatre, although that's a noble thing to be, but a great artist, full stop. And it's tragic in a way that the theatre is so ephemeral. Not many of Ralph's productions were filmed. I think a few of them were, but not really enough. And anyway, they didn't really quite give the sense of these extraordinary inspirations, these metaphors which he plucked out of the air, it seemed, but which just resulted in unforgettable and extraordinary theatre. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Simon. Well, that since we have seemed to have lost Di, Monica,
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to...
have we lost Di?
I'm afraid I have actually sent her an email. There's no reply. I hope she's all right. I do
Okay. Well, never
apologise
mind.
on her behalf. Can I make a suggestion, Pamela?
Yeah.
Invisible, actually, no, I'm no longer invisible.
Please do.
Since she's not with us, most unfortunately, would it not be a good idea for you to say, apart from what you were planning to say about Ralph as a sculptor, say a little bit about his early life and how you came to know about it, and give us a little more detail? I'm sure that's what you were planning.
That's what
anyway.
I was going,
Okay,
I
back,
was
back,
going to
back
do.
to you. Very good.
But I'm going to do it a bit backwards so I can follow on from Simon. Ralph was very silent about his early life. I knew him in a familial way. That is to say, he knew me, he knew my children. And in fact, he used to phone me up quite a lot. And my children, even when they were little, they used to come and they used to say, "Mummy, Ralph's on the phone, Ralph's on the phone." And they all learnt how to speak like Ralph. One day I had been teaching at Tel Aviv University, where I go quite often, and I'd come back, and on my coffee table I had a guidebook of Tel Aviv, obviously written in Hebrew. And to my astonishment, Ralph just picked it up and read it completely fluently. And I went, "Oh, really, Ralph?" And he looked at me and he just said, "Yes, really." Oh no, he said, "Yes, really." And that was the beginning of us kind of knowing each other. I want to fast forward now and tell you something about a very important production that he did when the Royal Shakespeare Company presented their plays at the Aldwych Theatre. And this is the play by Rolf Hochhuth, which is The Representative. And basically, it was about the complicity of the Vatican in the Holocaust. I was there at the opening night, and instead of the red curtain being down like it normally is, the fire curtain was down. And Charles, I wonder if Charles was there actually. No, he wasn't. Okay, and there was a projection across the fire curtain, and it was the names of all the people who had ever been complicit in the Holocaust as we now know it today, but at that time wasn't really talked about. And everybody was going in the order which was going, "What's this? Who are these? What are these German names doing? Who is this?" Oh dear, I'm going to put that up my dress so that I can't. Okay. Anyway, the fire curtain went up, and to the complete astonishment of the audience, the first image that you had was the Pope's throne room. And there was a red carpet going diagonally across the stage to the red throne. And there was the Pope, Alec McCowan, I think it was. But it was a gas chamber. And you saw the gas pipe coming down. And in one moment, you knew the whole story. And afterwards, Ralph said, "This is where life and art meet." And he always said it was the most important thing. It was the most important thing for him to make that statement. And he used to thank the director very much, because he said the director hadn't the faintest idea what Ralph was talking about at all, and just let him do whatever he wanted, which is of course what suited Ralph, as Simon has touched on. That the model of that is now in the Jewish Museum in Berlin, which Ralph donated. The director of that museum was also on the Kindertransport with Ralph. But mysteriously, all the documentation of that production in the UK, including all the production photographs, including all the drawings, including absolutely everything, has disappeared. Nobody knows where it is. Ralph at home has a portfolio and it says the representative, and it's empty. Now this is a mystery completely. And I believe, and there are other people, not just me, who believe it, is that at the same time as the representative was done, the American writer Deborah Lipstadt took David Irving to court on account of him being a Holocaust denier and Rolf Hochhuth, the author of the representative, defended David Irving. And there is somebody here, I'm not going to tell you who it is, it's not appropriate at this moment, who is at the moment investigating where all the documentation is, but it is a mystery. I have to say that I think Ralph would love that it's a mystery. That's the good side of it. So I want to now just ask you if you can see behind me here. I have on my studio table here, one of his latest artworks, which he called sculptures, although they sit on walls. And I'm just going to put this up so that you can see it, because this is, where are we? This is the illustration, in case you can't see the actual thing, which is in my house. I mean, normally sits in my house. I've put it there. And why I love this piece is very related to the representative, because in this piece of art, you have an old piece of ironwork. You have a perfectly sculptured ball, which I believe was part of some farm machinery that he found in Foncluse. And you have the gap between the elements. And in a way, Ralph, when we talked about the art exhibition that Simon referred to, which I called Atomic Landscapes, there's the book. I've got plenty on demand if anyone wants one. They're free. He loved to have disparate objects that made a total composition. And once he said, you know, that's what my life is. I leave you to think about that. Now, I think it would be good to hear from some of our guests, since we've opened up the conversation now. Simon, are you up for someone asking you a question? Yes.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, Monica, are you monitoring this?
I am indeed. I am absolutely mystified as to where Di has gone. It's a great shame, but so be it. So apologies everyone for that. But yes, let's take some questions here. Yes, Sarah Kesselman, first of all, a little story I could share. Sarah, please do unmute yourself, and over to you.
Where is Sarah?
I spotted her before and she's obviously here.
Yes,
Sarah, yes, do take over from here.
Sarah.
So my father, Morris Kestelman,
That's it.
did a painting about the Holocaust that was put on in Manchester at the Imperial War Museum. And there was a special exhibition, I can't remember how many years ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a bit more. It must have been a bit more. And also at that exhibition was an extraordinary painting by Dame Laura Knight about her experience as a war artist. And I'd never seen this. I'd never seen this kind of work of hers before. So it was very, very naturalistic. And then in the distance, you could see over a wall, as it were, the disintegration of the city and the burning of the city. And I was talking to Ralph about this painting, and he said, and I'm sure you all know this, that he was there at the Nuremberg trials as an interpreter, and he was able to point out in this painting each of the people who were giving evidence and remembered from all those years ago each of their names. He was very, very young, wasn't he? He was about 18 or something like that.
About 18. He was what they called that runner at the Central Office of Information who spoke German and might be rather useful to Sir Hartley Shawcross. Can you believe? Yeah.
Well, that was the story. It just hasn't come up in our conversation so far, but it was just such an extraordinary thing about his life.
Perhaps I could just chip in there. When I had the pleasure of visiting him in the Loire Valley shortly before his death, I had a good rummage in his extraordinary barn, which Pamela and others will know very well. And I actually came across a folder marked, I think it was Nuremberg, and lo and behold, there were some drawings that he had actually produced, as Sarah says, as a very young man, at the Nuremberg trials, which he claimed to have forgotten all about. And I was suitably excited, and I set them to one side. And I think I'm right, Pamela, they've now been donated to the Imperial War Museum. Is that right? So not only was he a translator, not only did he get up to all sorts of picaresque adventures, I think rather taking advantage of the black market, which is another story which shows that roguish side that Simon quite rightly pointed out, but he actually made a visual record himself, quite naturalistic as I recall, but very fluent.
That's right. And they are in the Imperial War Museum and they're listed in the archive. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Wonderful to hear that again and to be reminded of Dame Laura Knight. That's great. Thank you.
Right, just going through, there are a number of people asking questions from Jordi Planella, it's Catalan, I suspect, yes. It's wonderful to hear all these years of experience. Thank you so much for this. My question is it necessary to be a good artist to design sets? Interesting.
Oh, right. Well, shall I try to answer that?
Try to answer it, indeed.
Well, my simple answer is yes. And then I want to tell you why. We don't know if we're good or not, but the pleasure of making art is so great if you just put brush to paper or pen to paper and make a mark that you can fall in love with. I say, this is what I say, it's the best love affair in the world and it never leaves you. So I think it's very, very important to be able to love the work that you do. That's its personal value. This is what I think. Someone else might think differently. What do you think, Charles? Do you think differently? No, you don't.
Charles, do chip in if you wish.
You have to unmute yourself, Charles. Listen, I've got the language now.
Or indeed anyone else, if there are other stage designers in the audience, as I suspect there are, do feel free to contribute.
When you see what Ralph created from everyday items and turn them into art, it's quite remarkable. You've got a piece behind you, and I've also got a piece which I didn't think of showing, but they're very simple. But because they're simple, you can understand them and appreciate them.
Yeah. I'd like to. Where is Monica? Has Monica gone?
No, I'm here.
Okay, I can see on my screen Troy Houry, and he is a wonderful, wonderful installation artist. using objects, and I think he might have something to say about this.
Yes, as I say, by all means, anybody else who's in the field, in the world, please do
Troy,
contribute.
Troy. Oh,
Hi,
yes, there you
Pamela.
are.
You're
Hello.
so funny for pulling me out.
Oh, sorry.
Hope you don't mind.
Oh,
It's
you've got
okay, it's
squeaks
okay.
behind you. There you are.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm teaching now as well, like Pamela did. I always say to Pamela that I'm sort of following her history. And my whole career has sort of been spawned since I met her, 15, 20 years ago. So, but I think that anyone can be an artist. I do believe that. And it's something that I teach in my classes. I talk about how learning to express yourself visually is probably one of the most important things you can do. You don't have to be able to draw or to paint, but those are just skills. But how to use those and how to bring meaning to what you're doing as you're building that stuff is what's important. So, any artist that's the process of building that sort of thing. Something to bring up, actually, that it might be interesting to others as well, is that I did a second master's in London in 2012, and at that time the V&A did a whole I don't know, Pamela, if you made it to this, but there was a panel where they brought in people who were visual artists and scenographers or set design and performance designers, and had a discussion about the difference between visual art and scene design or performance design, because there's this struggle where visual artists have easily moved into our world as in theater, but scenographers and performance designers have had much more of a difficult time transversing that same sort of process. And I think that when you look at all of our as a designer and as an artist myself, I think that the process of understanding the meaning of text is really an important part of our process. But I don't even know where I'm going. I think I'm running on a little bit. Help me clarify, okay. Pamela, give me something specific.
Okay. Well, thank you, Troy. But just to say that Troy and I are, if I can be alive then, are collaborating in an event for World Stage Design in 2022, August 2022.
Yes, we're going to be working together. Next summer, we're hoping to do a bit of a virtual workshop, because we were going to actually have World Stage Design next year, but we postponed it and are very excited to have Pamela Howard as part of our Living Legends project. And
quite a responsibility to be a living legend, isn't it?
It is.
Can I just pick up on what Troy said about the relative ease with which sculptors could move into the realm of stage design? Because I saw probably about 2 years ago now, it was Anish Kapoor's designs for Tristan and Isolde at the Colosseum, and I was very struck by that intensely sculptural quality that in some ways seemed a direct legacy of Ralph's achievement. I've got some other questions. Let me just quickly
run
through them. Thank you. Right, should we stick with the sort of, the more professional questions first? From Catherine Radeva: I met Ralph 6 months after I arrived in the UK as a 16-year-old student from Bulgaria. He had such an incredible capacity to give advice to young artists. No question here. I just wanted to acknowledge his incredible generosity. Well, that's lovely to hear. I can well imagine.
Can I just say something, please, Monica?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Katerina, Kat, thank you for joining this. She is a wonderful visual artist and makes most beautiful prints. Anyone who has one of her prints or who hasn't one of her prints should kill to get one, in fact, buy one. But she and Alistair, her partner, have started a wonderful theatre company, which is both visual and performative and sculptural and has text. So all the elements that Troy has referred to are in what is called two-destination language, is their performance. And they perform in 2 languages, in Bulgarian and in English, or rather Scottish, Alistair would say. I just want you to know that, because she's not nobody, is Katerina Radeva.
Very nice. A question from Dinesh. Pamela, could you comment and perhaps establish a link between the three stalwart designers, Svoboda, Ming Cho Lee, and indeed Ralph, of course, the trio that the triumvirate that you opened with?
Well, yes. Of course, these are, or were, I should say, the great titans. Svoboda from the Czech Republic, and Ming Cho Lee from the United States. He came to the United States from Shanghai as a teenager, really, and Ralph Koltai. And what interested me about this event was that these three great horsemen, as I call them, had never met each other at all. And nor had they known each other's work, and nor were they remotely interested in each other. And I was moderating this event at a big white table on the front stage of the State Opera. And these three men were taking absolutely no notice of anybody, or indeed of the script that I had gone through the previous night with them. But it was a hilarious event, and may I say, we filled the State Opera, and anybody who was there has never ever forgotten it. But later, Arnold Aronson in America wrote the definitive book of the work of Ming Cho Lee, and I took it to Ralph and showed it to him, and he was unbelievably generous and admiring of Ming's achievements. And I reminded him that Ming Cho Lee had been the head of theatre at Yale University, and that Ralph himself had been the head of theatre design following Maurice Kesselman at what was then the Central School of Art. And anybody who met Ralph then as a student has never ever forgotten, even if he disagreed. And at the same time, I started a new initiative called the European Sonography Centres, and Joseph Svoboda was our patron. And so people who came to the European Sonography Centres all met him and his strange and peculiar ways. And in the end, these three did connect with each other. And that's the power of art. Look at us now. We're all connecting with each other. And if it wasn't for art, we wouldn't be.
Pamela?
Yes.
Could I follow on from that briefly?
Hi.
Hi, I've been here the whole time. I'm not sure you've seen me, but
I haven't. Can you say who?
Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Can you just say who you are, please?
My name is Rajesh Westerberg, and I'm a theatre maker, and I've worked in theatre pretty much my whole life. And I know Pamela from the European Sonography Centres, from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, where I did a master's degree in 1999. And what I wanted to say was that during that course, I was given the wonderful opportunity by Pamela to go to Prague in 1999 to work on an exhibition of Ralph's work. It was a retrospective at the Manes Gallery.
Manes, yes.
Yeah, and my good friend and colleague Eric Reel, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because he's doing a recce for a television job in Central America. He's aware of the conference, but it wasn't able to attend. But so he and I traveled there, and we were charged with setting up the exhibition. And actually, I wanted to mention to Charles Woolff that it was interesting. We arrived and we had to cover the entire floor of the Manes Gallery in mirrored perspex, and there wasn't any tools for cutting it at all. There was just these sheets, 8x4 or 10x4 sheets of perspex arriving, and like local crew to fit it up. So we were literally cutting this with a straight edge and a Leatherman, and then snapping it the way you would cut glass with a glass cutter. And nobody had the knack for it apart from myself. Everybody kept shattering the sheets, you know. So at the end, I think I cut almost the entire floor of the Monas Gallery with a Leatherman and a straight edge. But the story wasn't so much about that, although I wanted to mention that because it followed on from Charles's wonderful stories about Ralph's work with different materials in the theater. But it was more about taking those opportunities. It was something that the clip that Ralph said, you know, that everything that's happened to me in my career has just been by accident, but knowing when to like react to or take the opportunity of that accident. And really it was to say that opportunity which Pamela offered me with, you know, was to just go to Prague. All of my other colleagues, they took a bus, but Pamela said, well, I can't pay for you to come out to work on this exhibition, but if you can get yourself there, you know, you can be involved. So I bought myself a plane ticket and flew out 3 days ahead of my colleagues. And that led to a 20-year relationship of working with Eric Rio as a production designer, and then also working with Pamela on projects like the English Touring Theatre, the Cherry Orchard, and making furniture and things like that. So it was really linking all of those things, yeah. Mentorship. So that was really all I wanted to say.
Lovely,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, great to hear you.
Pamela, there are a number of other questions. Some of them are still quite specific to the way Ralph worked. Yes, a good one here. How amenable, how flexible was Ralph when it came to adapting his own designs, his original set designs, following conversations with the rest of the creative team on any given production? I wonder.
Charles might have something to say about this, but I would say adaptable is not the word I would use for Ralph. I think once he had decided on his accident, he called it, he always said, you know, it was just, he always said it was about recognizing the accident. And actually that's really valuable, you know, because when we think it out too much in theory, we sometimes miss the essence of it because we're taking too many things into consideration. I'm thinking of the planets. I'm thinking of those huge, huge balls that everybody said couldn't ever be done. I'm thinking of Ian Charleson refusing to go up the trapeze because he was in the Tempest, when the Tempest was being constructed. And Ralph just got in the harness and went up it. Never mind, he wasn't insured for accidents. He was very, very clear about what he intended to do, but he did not embark in arguments about it. And do you know people respected that? Isn't that true, Charles? Oh, he's...
Charles, are you there?
Yeah, I'm listening, but I was just muting. You're absolutely right. The thing about it is when he came up with an idea, it was so original that nobody questioned it. Because there was, you know, it was so different. And I found when the ideas we conceived sometimes and we thought about how we're going to do it, he got the approval, and that was the end of it. And I didn't, from my side, because I'm very much detached from the theatre world. I'm in a factory and I'm making things and I'm creating things that he wants. And the next thing I see it is, if I get a chance, I'm there first night and I see it and it's all finished. And I knew that in many ways he knew precisely what he wanted. And in a lot of occasions towards the end, he also knew how the whole production should be produced. Because his experience and his knowledge and his appreciation of how things work, because that was it. He didn't ask for anything that he didn't know how to make work.
Yeah. can I add one more thing to it? The very can you? Am I all right here? Yes.
You're wonderful.
Oh, okay, that's very nice. The very last thing that Ralph did was the Figaro trilogies for Welsh National Opera, and he said to David Pountney, well, when we did Simon Boccanegra, we had 2 screens and they worked perfectly well. So why don't you just do the same thing with Figaro, with Gets a Divorce, with Figaro, the 3 Figaros anyway. And I think David, to his credit, took a very deep breath and went, okay, well, I suppose that's right. And the thing is, it was right. And good for David for, you know, I think that's as much a chance to take. Well, you did it all right for Simon Boccanegra, so why don't you do it for the Figaros? It takes courage for a director to do that. And I took my hat off to David, really, for going with that. And then Ralph could see where it needed a door, put a door in. Where it needed a colour, put a colour in. But it didn't need all that much. Of course, he was very frail at that time as well. And we were doing an exhibition, but still he knew what he was doing.
Can I say something? Can
Yeah.
I say something from an acting point of view? So this is going back to the question of how flexible and adaptable Ralph could be. So Ralph was a great, great artist. There's no question about that. And what he was able to put together intellectually and artistically was, you know, no one could compare with it. But as an actor, going to him as a designer and saying, struggling a little bit with this thing or that thing, he wouldn't give an inch, not an inch.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to be reminded of that. Yes.
There's another question here, if I may. Hold on, let's just find it. Yes, which relates to all this. From Pavel, I'd like to ask the speakers, and I think maybe this is one for Simon, to say more about Ralph's visual metaphors, and it ties in with what Sarah's been hinting at or touching on here, about Ralph's visual metaphors. They were simple but monumental. And as Simon Callow said, they were not just worlds to inhabit, but to respond to imaginatively. Simon, would you like to pick up on that?
Well, I mean, sadly, I never acted on a Ralph Koltai
true.
set, but of course I saw many productions. One that I recollect particularly was at the National Theatre. It was Richard III. It wasn't on the whole thought to be a tremendously successful production, but it was an astonishing visual concept because the set just ran with blood. It was an abattoir, and blood just as the deaths piled up. The set just became a river of blood. And I found that absolutely chilling. Now, that's an instance, though, that Sarah kind of alluded to a bit, where actually I think it might have slightly overwhelmed the actors. But you might equally have said, or Ralph might equally have said, actually, the actors should have risen up to it. But sometimes that's not possible, you know. But also I remember, which was truly extraordinary, his design for Ibsen's play Brand, where Michael Brandt played Brand, and the entire set just came apart. It was just a titanic event. I mean, you might as well have been at, you know, at Niagara Falls. It was that sort of a natural event. That was what was extraordinary about it. But yes, I dare say it did take a bit of acting. I mean, Sarah's much more experienced than I. That it would have taken a bit of adapting, and sometimes time isn't given for that, and often you don't have the set in the rehearsal room. And if you'd had the set in the rehearsal room, then no doubt you could have kind of come up to it. But then again, I mean, things like his design for Cyrano de Bergerac were the most fabulously actor-friendly sets. I mean, they created such worlds with such simple gestures. That extraordinary tree with the falling leaves in the last scene of Cyrano was absolutely, Jacobi was
Yeah.
absolutely ravishing. And you as an actor just thought, oh, let me get onto that set. You know, I really want to
That's
take that,
right.
take that to heart. But no, you know, in the East, in the old former Soviet Union, etc., actors worked on the sets for months. You know, they became familiar with everything that was possible with that set. But we rarely have that luxury in the British theatre. You have, you know, a couple of days of technical rehearsal, and then bang, you're into dress rehearsals and then previews. And
Yeah.
so, you know, and Ralph, you know, we have to say, absolutely, although I think Ralph adored his life in England, it was a distinctly foreign presence.
Yeah.
He brought a different sensibility, and in, you know, in spades. So it really was a fabulous challenge for audiences and actors alike.
Thank you, Simon. I'm aware of time drawing on. We've had a few nice comments from people saying, sorry, but we have to go. So maybe it's time to begin rounding up. And I have two questions which kind of shifts the focus back to Ralph's biography, his early life in particular. One from Rosalind Rawson saying it would be interesting to know about what happened to Ralph when he first arrived in the UK on a kinder transport. And then from Sandra Alexander, which sort of ties in with this. Am I right in thinking that Simon said that Ralph, or I think it was possibly Pamela, was quite unemotional? Can one be an unemotional artist? Pamela, maybe yours?
Well, I'm sorry that Di isn't here because she did write that very first biography. But hello, Sandra, wherever you are. But I will say this, that he arrived, I think he was 11. Sarah, was he 11? I think he was about 11 when he came on the, when his mother got him a visa to come. They had to go to Brussels to put him on the train. And he thought that, he was going with his family. He didn't realize he was going on his own. And when he got to Liverpool Street Station, most of the children who'd been on that, and that was the last kinder transport to come, most of the people had families to go to or were assigned families to go to, but there were Quakers at the station to rescue children who didn't have a family, of which Ralph was one. And he was sent to a farm in Perthshire. And that farm, as Ralph told me, he didn't know at the time, because don't forget, he didn't speak English either, was a Borstal. Do you remember Borstal boys?
Yeah.
There was a song about them. And it was a reformatory for Borstal boys who were being taught to work on a farm. And Ralph summed it up by saying, it was there I learnt to defend myself with my fists. And I think that is a verbal metaphor for his life, really. So he wasn't willing to lie down and just be obedient. He defended himself with his fists. And I'd just like to say something very briefly. When he was working with Ken Russell on Die Soldaten, that's a piece by Zimmermann, and Ken tried to control Ralph by saying, now, I don't want any fancy work at all. I just want 3 platforms to get the singers on. I just want 3 platforms. And Ralph said, all right. And he took a female torso and cut it into 3 sections. Do you remember? And there was, so actors appeared through the legs, that was one section, through the head, that was another section, and through the torso. And I'm told that when Ken Russell saw it, he nearly fainted. Well, he more or less did faint on the floor and said, you know, what am I going to do with this? And Ralph just said, well, you said you wanted 3 platforms, and there they are. It's much recorded in the books about Ralph. But I think that symbolizes how you, I mean, when you think about it, there's a child on the kinder transport going to a farm in Perthshire.
He was 14, I think.
14.
And he actually, when he was 16, he ran away to the army because he hated it.
Yeah.
It was an appalling place.
Yeah.
And he got himself out at 16. Yeah. And he then started his life properly.
Yeah. So I think I would describe it as triumph over adversity.
Yeah. The famous thing is when he was, which he thought was the absolute turning point of his life, was when he was in that office doing in the army in at a lowly level in an office, and a guy came in and said, "Anybody here speaks German and can type?"
That's
and,
right.
Ralph said, "I can," and that was it. That was from that he went to Nuremberg, and that must have. I mean, it is fascinating that he didn't talk to anybody about it for so many years. But when he did talk about it, it was he was just absolutely clinical about it, about exactly what it was like. There was no emotion. I repeat that. He'd become objective. Ralph. He was made objective by that experience at such an early age. Can you imagine? He was among the very first people in the world to hear those people give their testimonies and to hear the prosecution account of what they'd done. I mean, and he was young. I mean, he was actually 15 when he left, when he came to England in 39. So this was 9 years later. So he was 23, 24, something like that.
And he didn't know that he was going to be without his mother, did he? Or either of his parents. He was very much abandoned.
Yeah.
Yes. Monica, how are we doing for time?
I think probably, fascinating as this is, and I know people have already sort of sent in comments saying that we probably ought to draw to a close, Pamela, unless there is anything anybody has that's burning. I haven't had time to read out all the questions, but well, I'm sure everybody will agree it's been a wonderfully fascinating event with much more that could be said about Ralph and his remarkable work. Can I just say just 2 very practical things? One is that the event has been recorded, so spread the word if anybody wants to re-listen to it or tell other people about it who couldn't make it tonight. It will be once again uploaded on that Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel. And the film is a work in progress. What you saw is very much a taster. I hesitate to say this, but, you know, I think any donations, any support that could be offered to fulfilling that project would be deeply appreciated, and get in touch with Insiders Outsiders if you feel that you're in a position to do that. So thank you very much, Simon and Charles, and obviously Pamela above all, and to everybody else, for those who contributed, those who simply listened in, thank you very much for sharing this wonderful event with us, and all the very best. Okay.
And thank you to all our friends.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone, and all the very best.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.